Hello, and welcome to this latest episode of the Energy Insiders podcast. My name is Giles Parkinson. I'm the editor-in-chief of Renew Economy and founder and editor of its EV-focused sister site, The Driven. Joining me, as he does each week on this episode of Energy Insiders, is ITK Principal David Leach. David, I trust you're well.
It's a beautiful spring day down here in Sydney, Giles, and it's an absolute pleasure to be running this podcast with you as usual, especially with our special guest, JD, this week.
Oh, JD, yes. Well, look, in a week where we're all promised free solar in the middle of the day, we're going to that other technology, almost forgotten technology now, wind energy. And we've got an interview with Jan Daniel Kaemmer, who is the Vice President Sales of Vestas in Australia. Just point out that we did actually do this interview before the company announced its third quarter results overnight. They talk narrowing of profits, but it's a big company. It's about $50 billion annual revenue. It's got 29 gigawatts pipeline of wind energy around the world. That's worth about $50 billion in itself. And it's probably, I don't know, David, is it the biggest player in Australia? We don't know.
In Australia, I think certainly, and I think outside China, the biggest player in the world by some distance. But, since China's a lot more than 50% of the renewable energy world, that's also a consideration.
Okay, well, let's have a listen to the interview with Jan Daniel, and then we'll be back with some news of the week. Jan Daniel Kaemmer, thank you very much for joining the Energy Insiders podcast.
Yeah, very nice to be here. I'm a big fan, Giles and David. I always listen to the podcast on my commute, but also when I have to do the cooking for the kids. So I'm very, very much looking forward to this. Yeah.
How old are the kids?
3 and 7.
As my dad used to say, never happier than when the car is full. But anyhow, we should talk about wind.
You don't want to see our car. It doesn't look good.
Is it wind powered?
It's real. It's not wind powered, no.
I'm wearing a bright red or sort of orange or something shirt. I was wearing a t-shirt before. It had solar as the future on it. And I thought, oh, gee, we're just about to interview a wind energy executive. So bit of change. So I was very polite. But wind energy, I mean, how much of a future does it have? Because there's been some doubts raised over it over the last, year. No projects to FID yet. That's not your responsibility because you just build the turbines. But where are we heading in things like, what's the view from inside Vestas about the future of the wind industry, and I guess particularly in Australia?
Yeah, so I think as you know, Vestas is entirely focused on wind. We both onshore and offshore; those are the two technologies that we work with, and we remain committed to the transition. And we still very, very excited about the future. Even though we also acknowledge that at the moment we're seeing a few headwinds globally on the offshore side, and also the energy topic is always a political one. So you're always exposed to where maybe the political and the public discussion goes. We are present in or we have wind turbines in more than 88 countries, so we are a real and true global player. So that's one of our strengths. We're able to actually also work through, let's say, the ups and downs in the different markets. So we feel that we have a big role to play, and we're excited about the future. If you look at,
I'm just going to interrupt. Actually, just sort of going back to the foundation, I was just quite fascinated by some notes that were provided here about. It actually started off in 1898 as a blacksmith workshop making steel frames and milk coolers, which I thought was interesting, and started developing wind turbines in 1978. And has so far installed 193 gigawatts and is working on about 6 projects in Australia. So you mentioned there are headwinds. What specifically are they in Australia?
Yeah, so Australia is one of those markets that we're super committed to, and it's one of the top markets for Vestas around the world. But as you've been also pointing out on your website and in the podcast, unfortunately, it's incredibly lumpy in Australia. So we had a fantastic 22 for Vestas where we closed a lot of orders, then a very low 23, then another great 24, and now we are a year in almost into or all through 2025, and the last project that was closed in Australia was actually one that we did between Christmas and New Year last year. So of course that's not good. We need consistency. So we are a little bit concerned seeing that the projects take too long to get to FID. I think we see that the government is providing the right support. Everybody's really committed to the transition. It's probably interesting. While maybe the rest of the world was all into renewables, maybe Australia was a little bit behind. Now it's a bit the other way around, and we have to really take opportunity of this massive opportunity, or that incredible opportunity that we have in front of us. For that, we need projects to get quicker through permitting. I think that's really the critical piece that we see our customers are struggling with. Customers are also telling us that some of the projects are maybe at the moment difficult to meet the investment hurdles.
Can we just stop on the investment hurdles there? Because I think the distinguishing feature about wind in comparison to other renewable technologies is that costs have gone up a lot more in the last 4 years. So let's, in your view, or from where you sit, where have the major, we can break it down into the turbine, the tower, and then there's the various balance of system costs, whether they're connection, whether they're the civil works, whether they're payments to landowners, whether they're connection costs. They've probably all gone up, but where are the big pressure points?
Yeah, you're right. I think you can see it. Costs have gone up across the board. But when you look at it, I think the turbine actually has tapered off. Steel prices, you can track them. They're not anywhere close to the high where they used to be. And I think also our component costs have come down somewhat. Where we really see continued increases on the local parts. So that is domestic transport, cranes, installation, balance of plant. I think you in your own podcast discussed this. It's incredibly expensive these days to build some of those projects when it comes to the electrical and civil infrastructure. So these are pieces that have impacted costs or prices of wind power.
And you've worked in a number of markets, although in Australia for the last few years. How do Australian wind costs at the moment compare with what Vestas sees in other countries? If you were quoting, I don't know, either in Europe or for onshore wind, either in Europe or in the United States. And when we get to the actual price that wind needs, it depends on how hard the wind blows, the capacity factor. But the actual cost of the turbine and all the other bits and pieces is relatively constant. Where do we sit?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, Australia is a far place, so that means you have always a pretty significant international transport component there. And when you look at the equipment and manpower costs, Australia is one of the highest countries in the world. So for sure, it's one of the those countries where we see highest prices. But I think it's important to always consider that it's not only the capex that we're talking about. It's as you mentioned, David. It's how much do we generate? What's the capacity factor? Nowadays we look at a lifetime of 25, 30, 35 years. So how long can these assets operate? And of course, how can we support them with the appropriate O&M operation and maintenance strategy for that lifetime? That in its entirety, that is, I think, what determines the cost of wind in Australia. And I think on top of that, I would say Australia is pretty complex. If you look at, for example, the grid integration and these pieces. So that is, of course, something that our customers look at and factor in. And we feel that Vestas, with our track record of more than 7 gigawatts in operation and soon getting towards the 10 gigawatts, we have demonstrated that we can deliver these projects reliably and mostly on time. And that is probably the biggest cost. If you are delayed for a month, 2 or 3 months, if it takes you longer to get through the grid approvals, that's a lot of money that is in there.
I think, Vestas itself has got a project in Walker, the Winterbourne project. As far as I can see, it's been in planning for 5 years now. started before your kids, they'll probably be in high school by the time it actually gets to be getting built. I didn't want to get too distracted, although I am interested in the prospects for Winterbourne itself. But let me just ask, do you think the cost appreciation has finished now? Let me put it another way. I mean, the projects are also getting bigger. So it's typically we're looking at 500 megawatts to a gigawatt style projects, maybe built in 2 stages, whereas before we used to be building 200 megawatts and even smaller before that. That should make costs come down in wind or not, unit costs.
Of course, there's some scale and some efficiency gains that we get from that, but often there are also additional costs that are very project specific. Just to give you an example, some of these giga deals, they need a special camp where you host the workers for the 2, 3, or 4 years of construction. That of course has an additional cost. So I think I would say inflation continues to be high. I think wages continue to be pretty high in Australia. So I think that part is one that we control less. And of course, when we look at the turbine costs, it's also a real function of the input costs in terms of raw materials, etc. So it also always depends on where the economy goes. We know that wind needs to be competitive in Australia. We know that otherwise we won't be able to build as much as we would like. And I think it's also a matter of making sure that we bring the right projects to the market, projects with the right wind and that are not too complex as we've been doing in the past.
So I've got 2 more quick questions before I hand back to Giles, and I could go for an hour and a half. I'm quite sure
I have time.
But question 1 is, we haven't, as you said, seen any projects really get to FID this calendar year. There may be a couple, the Palmer Wind Farm, and I think there's a Goldwyn one in New South Wales, Coppabella, that might get there, and another 1 or 2. But all the big projects, what do you feel from where you're sitting about the chances of them going ahead in next 12 months? Liverpool Ranges, there's the Bungarban project in Queensland, there's the Valley of the Winds project. There's projects in the Southwest Renewable Zone. I mean, there's gigawatts that are kind of almost there.
Yeah, I've seen your analysis, and look, I think we want, as an industry, we need more wind projects to get to FID. I'm hopeful that this year we will have a few as an industry. That's really, really critical to show that we have an ongoing expansion of wind. I think the capacity investment scheme has a few projects in there that have a chance to get to FID next year, but unfortunately it also has quite a few projects in there that I think are in the thick of their development process and probably will not be ready on time to be constructed by 2030, because a project, for example, like Golden Plains, that took about 3 years from FID to full production. So you whatever project doesn't start at the end of 26 will probably not be operational by 2030. So that's important. I think it's a little bit, I said this before, it's a bit like a catch-up bottle. I believe that next year we will get some of those projects that have been stuck in the EPBC or permit queue, and we will give it a bit of a big push, and it might be a little bit messy, I think. But I think we have quite a few projects that should go ahead next year. They do depend on some massive renewable energy zone build out, for example, like the Central West Orana or the Southwest.
So I wanted to ask you about that, because one of the things you mentioned, transport, one of the things the New South Wales government has tried to do is to improve the port at Newcastle and the transport infrastructure. And we know in Queensland it's ridiculous. You can only deliver, I think, 1 turbine a week up there because of the police requirements. But in New South Wales, we're very productive. We can deliver 2 turbines a week. I mean, it's all happening. But I suppose my question is, the REZs, do you think that we could make them more productive? Is there a way to get to 3 turbines a week?
I think this is always a question of how many transport lorries you put on the roads, and it's a question of the distance. Of course, you have to do these turns. I think infrastructure is really important. So a lot of the ports do not have enough space. You need, for example, as you said, police escorts in some of the states. That really hinders the delivery cadence. So it's always project specific. And on these big projects, it's super important that you get as many delivered as possible so you can feed the right amount of cranes, so you get the most efficient installation schedule. So
on the logistics, what you do is you deliver it all to site, or enough to site, so that you can have all your cranes going and be installing 3 or 4 a week once you've stockpiled enough there.
That is correct. So for these large projects, you need to create some sort of a buffer of the right amount of components so you can use those cranes efficiently. These are normally the most expensive part on a site. Is any day, any hour that the crane is not moving or installing is very expensive. So in order to take as much out of them, and you need to have enough towers, nacelles, and blades on site so you can use that crane as efficiently as possible.
What's the cost difference then of sort of transporting these massive blades and sort of turbine parts? Some of them have to go hundreds of kilometers, some of them go 600 kilometers. What's the difference between, say, going along a long flat highway or up over the Great Dividing Range and hills and turns and twists and things on top of ridges and things like that? Because we've seen a lot of the most prospective wind projects are in the southwest zone, which is flat. But a lot of the ones that have been built today have been in hilly areas.
That's right. I think look at the Southwest Res is a great wind speed, and it's flat. It has other challenges like remoteness, but when it comes to logistics, it's pretty far away. It's pretty far from any of the ports that we have. So that's going to be a real limiting factor. So probably easier to get there, but the kilometers are the kilometers, and it's far away from any of the major ports that our customers are considering. If you look at some of the other projects, I mean, in the New England area, David, as you know, there's some of those roads. They are very difficult to transport a blade for. I don't know, more than 70 meters is already a challenge. And nowadays, the rotors that we have in the market are more than 162, 172 meters. So that's a challenge on some of those roads, even though they might be closer. How do you make sure that those roads are adequate? How can you make sure that you do the modifications that are required? And something that is really interesting in Australia is how do you make sure you get those permits in, both from a state but also from a council, to do the road modifications in time, so you can deliver them when it's needed to the project.
And how hard is that? It sounds hard.
I've worked around the world, and I have to say it's pretty complicated in Australia to work through that. I think that's one of that's when we talk to our customers and to the developers, that's where they're struggling with, to how do they get from federal to state and also to the state council level and get those approvals in.
And so what is the cost of, the cost of transport, for instance? I mean, I don't know whether we can just sort of say the Australian component or even the international component. I mean, where are the Australian turbines built, or the turbines sort of destined for Australia? Where are they built?
Yeah, so at Vestas we have a global supply chain. So we manufacture all around the world,
except Australia.
But except Australia, we can talk about that as well.
I remember the very first story I ever wrote about renewable energy was in 20 years ago. It was for the old Bulletin magazine, which doesn't exist anymore, and it was on the occasion of John Howard had just scrapped the mandatory renewable energy target, which had the bold ambition of doubling Australia's renewable share from 1% to 2%. And Vestas had plans at that stage to create a nacelle factory. I think it might have been in Victoria or Tasmania, but ripped up those plans because of that. Any plans to bring that back?
Well, we just talked about that we didn't have any order for a year. So, of course, nobody can really invest in a supply chain locally if it goes up and down. So we've been always out there saying, when there's enough volume, if there's enough steady volume that allows us to make an investment, that is something that we would consider.
Yeah.
But we cannot do this if 1 year we have a lot and the next year we have nothing. We need a steady multi-year steady volume for sure. And
I'm sure that would reduce costs. That would reduce costs a lot. And I'll just throw something else in there that I think the actual we talk about the nacelles and the turbines, but and the blades, but in fact, when I looked it up, that's only about 5 or 10% of the total volume of materials that has to be transported.
But I wouldn't agree that it will be cheaper. I have to say, and that's the other part. If someone manufactures in Australia, that will for sure not be as competitive as when it comes from some of the other countries. Not only because the cost of producing is lower, but also the scale. When you look at some of our factories, these are factories that build gigawatts and gigawatts every year. Whereas what's the volume that a factory in Australia could do? So I think that's really something that if there's a requirement for local manufacturing, that needs to be considered in the price. If someone produces locally and then suddenly needs to compete against a super efficient supply chain from elsewhere, that doesn't work. Yeah. And I think those are discussions that have to take place.
Just one more question before I hand back to David. We've seen some talk. Well, we've seen in the solar technology, we've seen the sort of a pairing of solar and batteries for hybrid projects, which seems to be very popular at the moment. There's discussion also of wind and battery projects. I don't know whether wind is as affected by negative prices as solar, but I'm sure they are affected to a certain extent. Is Vestas looking at this technology in any way at all?
I think if you ask our developers and the operators, they will complain about a lot of curtailment. So I think a battery probably makes sense because the curtailment that we see in the market is significant. I think most of our customers, they will now develop their projects with an additional battery.
Will you do it behind the meter DC coupled? I think was probably my question.
Yeah, so I think that's then that we will do together with our customers, and I think we have a few that are looking at that. I don't see as much volume in that space yet because I think the wind shape is still pretty good, and then secondly, it's probably also a bit complicated to do that when it comes to all the grid modeling and the grid integration. And I can't help but see when you look at the IEMO scorecard, you can see how many applications have been done by technology, and you can see a lot of solar plus BESS. But at least last time I looked at it, and I didn't look at the last one, there was no wind plus BESS. So it seems like for our customers so far, that's something that they do look at separately. But surely something I think will come more and more.
Yeah, I think there was one wind plus BESS in the latest capacity investment scheme, but I can't remember the name of it. David.
So another issue then, I guess, in every product area is generally competition with China. When you look domestically in China, of course, and it comes to renewable energy, they are a dominant force, I think it's fair to say, within China. And obviously their costs are massively much lower when you look at, say, Goldwind's turbine costs within China. They don't even if they don't include towers. I just wondered, when you sit back and think about Vestas versus Goldwind or another Chinese manufacturer, what do you see?
Yeah, I think that's a topic, of course, we see quite a bit. And I think to start with, we believe that competition is good. There was a time some years ago when customers are telling
everyone says that, but lots of people would be just as happy if there wasn't any competition. Speaking as someone that worked in the competitive industry myself lots and lots of times, I did always say competition was good, and it was also good when there was less of it. But go on.
Well, and we've had a time where our customers were telling us that we were the only OEM and we didn't have any competition. And I think, first of all, I don't think that's true. There's always other OEMs active. But we've been in Australia for our first project we did in 1994 in Port Esperance in WA, and we've since really invested into this market. We have more than 900 people here and a lot of partners across the industry and contractors that we work with. So I think we've gained the position that we have through that track record. And when there's more competition, of course, we have to compete with them. But we believe our part of our value proposition comes with that we're able to reliably deliver these projects safely and in the right quality. And I don't think that's necessarily something that every other OEM can say in Australia. And I think that's what our customers value from Vestas so far.
And can we just talk about, well, there's a couple of little things that are sort of, there's a technology difference. Some turbines have gearboxes and some don't. I mean, that's the technology difference that I'm aware of. Just briefly for our audience that may not knows even less than I do about this topic, which is very difficult, but there must be someone that knows less. Can you just explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I cannot talk too much about the gearless turbines, which I think some years ago was really one of the key technology discussion. Gearbox against gearless, which basically have a permanent magnet generator and do not use the gearboxes. At Vestas, we've always used gearboxes. I think at the moment Enercon is one of those that continues to be a gearless OEM. I'm not too close to some of the other OEMs, but I think all of them have in some way or the other moved to geared solutions. I think in the end it's something that we maintain for the lifetime of the projects, and we see that there's a good reason why we use this technology. That's kind of our
maintenance. It makes maintenance easier.
I think it's at least part of our maintenance strategy. It's mechanical and electrical, and we know how to we know how long a gearbox can last, and we know how to exchange it. We have a supply chain. We have partners that we've used them in our development and continue to use them during the operation.
So this brings up two additional points. One is just about with these, particularly with the bigger projects, Vestas will offer a whole of lifetime guarantee these days, which I think helps to reduce operating costs. Someone said that to me once. Is that a way to think about things?
Yes, we think so. Our value proposition is not only to deliver and install or design, deliver and install those turbines. We want to maintain for as long as the customers think makes sense. And we see in Australia a lot of the service terms are 30 plus years. So we think that's one of the things that not only our customers but also our investors really appreciate, our shareholders appreciate. And I think part is when a customer doesn't have the setup and the scale to maintain it themselves, but also some of their banks and financing structures require someone to basically underwrite the operation of the wind farm. We use availability levels, etc. That we guarantee over a certain period of time.
And I did have another question that slipped my mind, but let me just ask about the other form of competition that I think the broader industry sees. It's not the within wind competition. It's, as Giles will keep telling you, the wind versus solar and battery competition. And it seems to me at the margin, wind is losing that battle for a bunch of reasons. The cost of wind has gone up. The cost of solar has stayed flattish, and the cost of batteries storage has declined a lot. The cost of transmission, which wind probably needs more than solar, they both need it, has difficult, although you can see the transmission getting built one way or another now. How do you feel about that overall competition? And let me say at the outset, my own view is that every study I look at shows that we still need lots and lots of wind in the system. The people who think you can do it all with solar and batteries, I just don't agree with that at all.
And I fully agree with you, David. That's exactly how we see it. Look, I think it's great to see how the deployment of batteries takes place in Australia, but we also know that the batteries need to be they don't generate; they need to be charged. And Australia has great solar resource, so that makes sense. But we see that there's a role for wind. First of all, if we want to do in Australia what we need to do, replacing some of those old coal power plants, we need as much generation as possible, and wind is a key answer to that. Of course, we see the CIS results, and we see that last time there was more BESS plus solar than wind. But maybe next time it looks different, because Australia has a fantastic wind resource. WA, South Australia, as well as Victoria has an amazing wind. Maybe there's some other states where you could say, look, is the wind good enough, and is it too expensive to install? But there's still plenty of great projects out there with by great developers, where we see that they can compete, and they're working hard on getting them to market.
And my other question before I hand back to Giles is, we talked, the wind, about continuity of production, which I personally agree is a good way to get unit costs down, is just to build steadily and to have, so many, instead of stop-start. I guess I was just going to ask about models of turbines. For a country like Australia that might be going to install, if we did well, 5 gigawatts of wind a year, I
would love that. 5 gigawatts a year.
I'm sure you would. I would love that too, probably. But would it be best to focus on just one model of turbine? I think the criticism of the industry, Vestas, in the past has been that, they introduce a new generation of turbines before they fully amortize the cost of the old ones. And so you don't even get your scale benefits yourselves, let alone be able to pass them on to customers.
Yeah, so I think, Australia has always been a market where the biggest turbines prevail. And I think that's part of one. It's what we call pad constraint. So the BOP is so expensive, so you want to have the biggest turbines as possible on your sites. You have all these restrictions, which I also think are unique to Australia, around setbacks and how much vegetation clearance you can do, etc. So that also wants you to install, let's say, the least possible amount of turbines with the same megawatts. And then you have this fixed cost, which is pretty high for your connection, etc. So that basically brought our customers to always look for the biggest turbines, and that's what I think continues to be the case. And you need to evolve.
And that's 6 megawatts now, practically, in Australia.
Yeah, it's now. So if you look at a few years ago, was from a Vestas perspective, the V150 4.2 megawatts. That then has been replaced with the V162 6.2 megawatts. The next few, I think in the next years, we will see the next generation, which is the V172 7.2 megawatts. So it's kind of that same family, which continues to evolve. And our focus, David, is really to do incremental innovation. So it's basically an evolution. We don't want to come up with new platforms all the time, because, just as you say, it requires a lot of R&D investment, but it also requires a lot of investment in our supply chain. And by the way, if you come with the next big turbine, then you still need cranes, still need the transport, and if you increase that too much, then you might create another problem, which means you need to get a different type of crane into the country, and that drives cost itself. So we're trying to look for that sweet spot, but at the moment I think it's that between the 6.2 and the 7.2 megawatt. But maybe just to finish off, it's also at Vestas we have a portfolio of turbines, and if you have a site where you need something,
you've got one. If I need a wind farm at the house, you've got a turbine for me.
Not anymore.
I'll hand back to Giles in just a second. But the other question I want to ask is, what can Vestas do with its 900 people to actually help the costs of building wind go down? It's not your job, I suppose, to work on social acceptance necessarily, but I mean, there's a role for the whole industry to work on these difficulties. And, I guess, what are you doing and what's the progress?
So, we focus on making sure that we have the most efficient delivery and the most efficient solution. I think that's what we can do. We have a lot of knowledge in ensuring that we operate those wind turbines as aggressively as possible. And maybe not everybody knows, but there's a lot of optimization that goes into the power curves, into how long can you operate those turbines. So that's a piece that we look at a lot. We work very closely with our contractors if we do an EPC, but also when our customers contract someone else to do the balance of plant. We work closely with them to ensure that we have the most efficient construction setup, the sequencing, the requirements for some of that infrastructure. And I think at the same time, it's really important that we continue to work with our customers on the, let's say, on the total life cycle cost, because that's in the end.
Do you have your own grid modelers, for instance?
We have a lot of grid models. We have the big grid modelers. We have the biggest grid team that investors in Australia, and we work with our, let's say, with our hubs in India and in Porto. So we take a lot of pride in that. And it's, if you look at Golden Plains, for example, it took us 3 years to get basically a few months ago to full generation, and there were other projects that started before that, and they're still not there.
Yeah,
and you can see that on our AMOS website. So that's one of the things that there's a lot of value in that for our customers.
Certainly, I think Golden Plains has been a success story so far, notwithstanding one or two incidents. Back to you, Giles.
Just to clarify the size of the turbines then, so the biggest one in Australia at the moment is about, what is it, the 6.2 megawatts, or have you got some orders for the 7 megawatt one, the 7.2 or the 7?
So far we have installed the V162 6.2, for example, at Golden Plains, and we're installing some projects with that technology. And we're working actively on some projects where we hopefully will deploy the V172 7.2 soon.
Okay.
So it hasn't arrived just yet in Australia.
Any of those projects have been announced, or are they still secret squirrel stuff?
Yeah. So what you will see from Vestas is that we will not comment on any projects before it really has. We have received what we call a firm order, basically payment guarantees, a contract. So there's a lot of I see all these news everywhere about this agreement and that agreement, but when you hear something about Vestas, it's because we have made a commitment and we're starting manufacturing those wind turbines.
Although you, like some other companies, still come out sometimes and say, "Oh, we've got this 250 megawatt order in Australia, but we can't tell you what it's for." But which project? And I'm going, well, that's interesting. Anyway, that's just a journalistic whinge. Repowering and recycling. So the first Australian wind projects went in sort of, more than 20 years ago. So some of them are now sort of coming to the stage where decision has to be made about repowering and or recycling. Could you just sort of tell us how Vestas views this? I mean, it's not your decision; it's the developer's decision. But what are the things to take into consideration when you're thinking? You've those 20 or 30-year-old wind farms have probably got really small wind turbines. They might have a limited production capacity. They might have new landowners. What are the things to?
And you have to. I think if you go into some other markets, probably repowering is a way to market that is a little bit easier.
Why is that?
I don't think that's because they have regulation in place where you basically do not have to go through the entire permitting cycle, or you can use some of the pre-existing infrastructure, etc. I think if our customers want to replace wind turbines, they'll have to basically start all over again, and some of them take the decision to extend the lifetime of or the operating life of those assets. So, for example, in South Australia, we have a project with ENGIE, Canunda Wind Farm, just turned 20 this year, and together with ENGIE, we've worked on the expansion of that asset.
Expansion
lifetime.
Yes.
No, that lifetime.
Yes.
The extension of the lifetime, and probably the decision was taken that made more sense at that point in time. So for repowering to really make sense, it really requires our customers to have a quicker way to market as well, I would say. But there's potential. You have a lot of turbines that in the next decade will come to the end of their life, and then our customers will take the decision what to do with it. When it comes to recyclability, at Vestas, we have committed to sustainability targets, and part of that is, for example, the recyclability of our blades. Which we've been in the market since last year, about that we will be able to recycle those blades, and that includes even existing turbines.
Okay, and that's including in Australia. The facilities are there to do that in Australia.
No, I think this is. I think that the solution is there. I don't think that there's a facility for that.
Just to spend 1 second on that, and sorry to interrupt, but a turbine blade is mostly a carbon fiber composite thing, is it not?
That is correct. Yeah.
I think it's absolutely wonderful to look at those massive size propeller blades. Speaking of someone that flies my model aeroplanes, I'm fascinated by carbon fiber. But how do you recycle it? Do you just very quickly?
Yeah, well, there's a process that we have developed with our partners in the Nordics, whereby then basically we are able to apply a process. I don't have all the detail to then bring it into its original ingredients. I think that's more or less what it is.
Okay.
Yeah, you heat it up, and the glue melts, and then you just pull the bits out. But that's probably why I'm not working on recycling. Over to you, Giles.
Yeah, look, just so we get into the stage where we need to sort of finish off. We haven't mentioned offshore wind. Offshore wind is sort of happening. Well, the Victorian government very much wants it to happen. Has a target of 2 gigawatts by 2032, and I think 9 gigawatts by the end of that decade. How's Vestas looking at the offshore wind industry in Australia? Because you've had all sorts of problems in the US, of course, they're mostly political. In Europe, probably a little bit of politics, but also, questions over market design and tender design and things like that. So, in Australia, we've had the auction that was supposed to be held this year and has been put off. How are you looking at it?
Yeah, so it's clear that offshore wind, for us at least, has a role to play in the future. Also, probably in Australia, because it is complementary to maybe the onshore resource, but it's expensive. We know it's more expensive, significantly more expensive than onshore. It also requires scale, I would say. You need the harbor facilities, the pre-assembly facilities. You need to be able to make these massive foundation structures. That is an industrial development, and that development takes significant time. And so we've been in Australia supporting our customers during their feasibility processes, but we can also see now that some of them are looking at if they can see a pathway that is close enough, but also that where they see that they can get the returns that they're looking for. And I think that's probably something which they have to work through over the coming years with the Victorian government, because it will come at a cost, and that has to be paid by someone. Which, by the way, is not only it's not only happening in Australia. It's, I think, around the world. People are looking at, okay, how costly is offshore going to be, and what is the design for these markets. In Europe, we can still see a buoyant offshore industry, and we also see in some of the Asian markets that the offshore has a key role to play.
And why is that? Why is it potentially buoyant in Europe?
Well, because they have very, very high energy needs, and in the UK. They have a great resource, and they have a setup which allows projects to be deployed. They have an industrial scale. You have, for example, in Japan, you have a very significant need for energy, but you have a geography that doesn't allow for so much wind or solar, and they need to find the alternatives. And the Japanese government, for example, sees that offshore is a part of the solution, just like it is in Korea. Now, is it going as fast as people were thinking maybe some years ago? No, but we still continue to see that there will be a role for offshore wind. Mm-hmm. I think in Australia it remains to be seen how the next few years go, because it's a significant investment that the developers have to put in, and they need to see that they have a route to market.
And it is fair to say that we've got a pretty good onshore resource. It's not just in terms of wind speed, but also in terms of land, and most resources, other than maybe transmission and water and stuff like, and accommodation, but I mean, we've got a lot that we need for onshore wind.
Definitely. And I think personally, I would like us to focus on making sure that we get as much onshore wind out there as possible. I think that would be a really good use of our time, and that allows us to get to 2030, because there won't be any offshore wind by 2030. That's pretty clear. So yeah, I fully concur with you.
Okay, David, you got any more questions? I've run out, I think.
I haven't run out of questions, but I think we've run out of time. Just like Manchester, a bit like Chelsea, never beaten, just run out of time. Yeah. But I think Bayern Munich would say that that's PSG's story this morning. But anyway, we're off the topic again.
I can talk about football any day, and I mean European football, not Aussie footy. And my team is not Bayern Munich, but I won't get into that.
Oh, no, I want to know.
It's Borussia Dortmund. It's after my wife Vestas. It's the third love of my life. And my kids. Don't tell them that. So, yeah.
Well, there you go.
Thanks very much for the time today. We've enjoyed it a lot, and it's great to hear a little bit of detail about wind. And there's so often I think the conversation's at such a high level that people don't. It's nice to get in a little bit into the weeds. Thanks again.
No, thank you for the time, and we are incredibly excited about Australia. I think we will have some great years in front of us. I really enjoyed this discussion with you, and thank you for the good work that you're doing. Really appreciate it.
And that was Jan Daniel Kaemmer from Vestas. David, what was your main take from that?
Well, the main take is something that we all know, but it bears repeating, and that is that if you don't get started in 2026, get to FID, you won't be ready by 2030.
Which means we're not going to have an 82% renewable target met on time.
I think it's very difficult. We certainly need... I'm not fully convinced all the policy settings are completely right at the moment, but neither do I think, neither am I either advocating or expect there'll be any major changes. And no doubt we'll come to a big policy that was announced during the week. But the point I wanted to make here is that, one, we do need wind. Every study that's ever done says that you need wind as part of the mix. It just produces a lower overall prices. And secondly, that it's policies that have demand pull in them as opposed to supply, as opposed to tax or rules policies, I think have a big place to play. So if we look just away from wind at them, so we've replaced the REC scheme with the capacity investment scheme. So the capacity investment scheme provides insurance, but it doesn't provide any incentive for gentailers to write PPAs, as opposed to the REC scheme, which basically imposed big penalties on them if they didn't do enough renewable energy. And we can see the same thing, just carrying on for a second, in the electric vehicle category, where if we look at countries like China and Norway, two very different countries, but both with now good high shares of electric vehicles, they've got a lot of demand pull policies in there. Like in Norway, you could get free travel you could go on bus lanes in cities and so on and so forth. Those sort of minor policies and registration relief that we had for a little while here in Australia, but seem to have abandoned. I guess partly because it's state government rather than federal government. So at the federal level, we've got the leasing incentive, but that only really helps the upper end of the market. It doesn't help the mass market in the same way that rooftop solar and household batteries policies do, and now, as we're going to come on to, for different solar pricing in the middle of the day. So anyway, that's a long burst from me, but the simple point is what came out of that, we need wind, and it would be useful if we had some way in incentivising people to actually sign the blasted PPAs.
Yes, exactly. Well, maybe we'll get an answer when the final version of the Nelson Review is handed down in a few short weeks. But
yes, well, not
holding out for that. And we may finally get a couple of PPAs for some small wind farms, as I think we've mentioned over the last couple of weeks, with a few things drawing closer to fruition. Waddy Wind Farm in WA, and the Palmer Hill and the Carmody Hill wind projects, I should say, in South Australia. And as you say, I mean, wind can be a very good resource, but unfortunately we're kind of locking the best resource away at the moment because of the Queensland NNP. And
Well, it's not necessarily the best resource. It's a resource that is divergent from it's a good portfolio fit with the wind in, say, Victoria and South Australia and New South Wales. Actually, the best wind resource, and this is for all the Bob Brown supporters out there, is onshore in Tasmania. That is actually where the best wind resource is, onshore in Australia. And maybe in West Australia too.
yeah, well, I'd argue also that the Queensland wind resource, as I think the point that you've made in this podcast several times, is possibly the most valuable because it's because of when the wind blows in Queensland and how that might be useful.
Yes. And as you say, I've been a huge advocate of that policy, but I will say that the benefits of that are less now that the cost of batteries has declined so much.
Yes, yeah. And we've had a new battery project get to financial close, Elaine battery, done by Acacia Energy, which has quickly emerged from basically nowhere to have, according to Rystad Energy, the largest portfolio of batteries sort of reached financial close and committed in Australia, overtaking Neoen already. So that's quite remarkable. They're also almost completed the Waratah super battery, a big shock absorber on the Central Coast. So still no problems getting batteries over the line.
So, Giles, do you want to do some National Party bashing at the moment? It's too easy for me.
Oh, yeah, well, just to point out that they're a bunch of effing idiots, and really just
I heard David Littleproud had the gall to stand up and talk about Heli. That's a slightly more a supercritical coal station reduces emissions. He said, "Do you know that?" I mean, that wasn't even news 10 years ago, let alone today.
But I mean, look, one thing that does really piss me off actually is the fact that they've spent the last couple of years parroting and quoting this figure about how net zero is going to cost Australia $9 trillion by 2050. Now, this is a report put out by University of Melbourne. God, I can't even think who else it was now. Princeton and I think the University of Queensland. At the time, we pointed out that this is just bollocks because basically it's including a whole bunch of things which will be done overseas and, business as usual purchase such as buying a new car. And they finally stood up and wrote a note saying, actually, we didn't really mean 9 trillion. The actual added cost of getting to net zero by 2050 is 300 billion over 25 years, which in the journal,
it's a number that was out of date when they published it, and it's a lot more out of date now. I don't know what the real number actually is.
Well, it's not 9 trillion, David, and it just pisses me off that they took 2 and a bit years and waited for the Nationals to sort of blow up sort of any sort of, seemingly bipartisan support on net zero. So it's just it is just so typical of the way that the climate policies have been done in Australia.
We get this net zero thing, it's just entirely political. It's got almost no relevance to anything that anyone does in the real world today, although no doubt it will as we move towards it. What we have is a federal government and mostly state governments that are somewhat aligned on the view of getting on with the job at what they consider is a good pace. And to this end, we had a new policy announced this week, didn't we, Giles? What do you think? What is the policy, and what do you make of it?
Free solar in the middle of the day. Look, Chris Bowen has announced that he's going to be asking the Australian regulator to require all energy retailers to make an offer of free solar in the middle of the day for 3 hours. Now, some retailers already do this. I can think of OVO Energy, which is now owned by AGL. A lot of people are pretty pissed off about this. I thought it was heavy-handed intervention into the market. And maybe they are right, but I actually think it's quite a good move. One, politically, I think it's very clever, given that you've got Nationals wandering away from net zero because they think it's too expensive, and just sort of putting on the table here that, actually renewables can reduce energy, at least at certain times, energy costs at certain times. I think that's very clever. I also think it's a really good leverage to just underline the fact that we are having these massive surpluses of solar, particularly in the middle of the day, and the wholesale prices are going negative. And apart from people like you and me who have got rooftop solar on the roof, not many people are getting benefits. So
let's be careful about
sentence.
But the not many part, I mean, I object to that because, in fact, 40% of us have got rooftop solar at the moment.
Well, that means 60% of us don't.
I agree, but 40% is quite a lot, is what I would say.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But I still think there's probably 60% out there. And I think their view of the world, and particularly with their renters and people living in apartments, might be pretty pissed off because the bills have gone up so much in the last couple of years, particularly in the last year, outrageously so and unjustifiably, in my view. And I just think it's quite clever to put it out there and put the retailers on notice that, yes, people are being invited to think differently about it, and they've actually got to try harder to sort of make things interesting for consumers. Now, look, in the end, not that many people may benefit from it because, one, it will just be an offer. Two, if they're going to do low cost or zero power in the middle of the day, they're almost certainly going to bump up the charges either on the daily connection fees or on the evening peaks, which is exactly what OVO Energy does. We had a look at that, crunched the numbers. We kind of worked out, because we've got 2 electric cars, we could probably use so much electricity in the middle of the day that would offset the evening peaks, but for all the people probably can't use that much electricity in the middle of the day to offset the rise in the evening peak. But look, I just think it's a very clever thing.
The third point, just to be careful about raising the fixed costs, you need to remember that the pricing structure that retailers offer is largely dependent on what the network's pricing structure.
Largely dependent, but not totally dependent. So we're up here in regional New South Wales. We get hit as much as $2.60 a day before GST by some retailers, and less than $2 by others. So there's a
network cost in that. What's the network cost?
The actual network, well, I don't know. It's not visible on my bill. Oh, no, that's what I'm saying is the network, well, that's the fixed fee. What the network component of that is not visible on my bill.
But it is if you go and look at the Essential Energy website, you'll be able to find what their fixed cost is per day, and you will find that the retailers are taking the cost structure of the network and then just adding bits on everywhere, if you see what I mean. So
that's
the network,
right. So
the network probably charges you over $1 a day. And actually, it's not necessarily wrong it's because most of the network, the wires and poles costs, are entirely fixed, and that don't vary very much whether you consume more or less.
I get that, David, and I think I do get that. I just think that there are smarter and cleverer ways of doing this that can offer more benefits to more people.
Yes, that's right, and that's obviously what the policy about free solar is designed to do. But there are 2 other sort of things that you would think about. The first is that, a lot of people, the smart move would be to take free solar up in the middle of the day, if you're one of these 60%, add in a household battery or an EV, go like crazy in the middle of the day and use your battery overnight when all the rest of the charges are there. The first thing to say about that is that actually if that happened, the market would respond. Pricing structures would respond. Wires and poles have still got to recover their costs. Retailers have still got to recover their costs. They're not going to, now they may absorb some of it and get slightly lower profits, but the networks can always earn the same return. That's by definition the way that we work it in Australia. The second thing is that the policy, but in fact you can't put a battery in if you don't have rooftop solar and get the battery discount that the federal rebate that the federal government offers. So that's it doesn't seem like the 2 policies. It's not entirely clear how the 2 policies are supposed to mesh. The other thing that Tristan Edis pointed out, and all of us have been looking at, is it actually strongly disincentivizes you to install rooftop solar on its own, unless you also plan to put a battery in, which of course everyone does. And as Tristan also pointed out in that excellent article that you published of his, rooftop solar installations this year are actually already down 18%, and they're probably going to drop quite a lot more now. So there are, these policies are easy to announce, but it's famous in economics that the policies have unintended consequences, and I'm not jumping one way or the other until I exactly see what this is, although I do see that my mate Rob Coe at Morgan Stanley, who's the utilities analyst there, is saying that AGL and Origin are going to see a profit hit as a result of it, and presumably if they're seeing a profit hit, then some consumers are benefiting.
Well, that's right, yeah, and I think he actually quantifies the consumer benefits to about $600 a year, I think, for those able to, in a position to take that up, although that would be depending very much on people's individual circumstances and usage patterns. What else we got, David? We're just coming into. Look, I do want to mention Western Australia grid getting to 89%, 89.4 or 5%, I think. Renewables penetration on Monday. Well, they got to they broke record 2 days in a row this week, and on Monday 89.5. That's extraordinary when you think that they are a completely isolated grid, can't import or export, don't have transmission links anywhere else, and are kindly, entirely dependent on their own resources. The second of their 2 gigawatt-hour batteries is now sort of up and running, not at full capacity, but it will be soon. So what's happening over there is quite amazing, even though there's a lot of frustration about the state government sort of pace of rolling out new wind and solar, and of course some of its gas support industries, but I think that was worth noting. And then, David, we've got the United Nations annual climate party happening in Brazil.
Well, the United Nations has got a climate party, and they apparently seem to have released a report to coincide with that, as one does, that suggests, to no one's great surprise, that we're very unlikely to be able to keep the global warming below 1.5 degrees. It's worth mentioning in West Australia that of course, it's a very big state physically, and therefore it's really a bunch of networks when you look at all the load, but nevertheless, they have got fantastic wind and solar resources, and if any grid can run itself, certainly West Australia should be. It's got great wind and great solar resources, and lots of gas to back it up, as well as the batteries. So
and no hydro.
Yes.
And no hydro, which is also the case in South Australia. Yeah, look, the UN thing's going to be interesting. Yes, that emissions gap report was a bit depressing. It also points out too that, even though we've kind of missed 1.5 degrees, it just underlines the point that we can't miss 2 degrees by too much, because each half a degree will compound the impacts of climate change and heat deaths, which the National Party say apparently don't happen, but that's bullshit. And there'll be some sort of stern talking, but probably not much development. And then I guess in the next 2 weeks, we'll find out if Australia gets to host the next United Nations Climate Party in Adelaide next year. And I'm suspecting now that it's probably just as likely not to happen as to happen. And it may be that the ALP might not be too unhappy about that. Mainly because if you can't even organise a venue, get agreement on a venue, it's really hard to get agreement on anything substantive at the global level on action. And it could,
yes, I do think there's the execution of policy needs to be sharpened up a lot. That's one of the problems with the opposition being so completely and utterly hopeless, and the Teals are going to oppose the environment laws, legislation that's been proposed. So there's quite a lot of things that need discussing. One of the points is that Steve Johnson, who I think is the CEO at Suncorp, is pointing out that insurance costs in Australia have doubled in the past few years, like flood and fire insurance costs. Another report I was reading, so that there's very real costs of not doing something about insurance. And if you're right about the fact that these get bigger exponentially for every change in temperature, then those costs can be expected to accelerate further to a point. We've already got like a huge number of houses that can't get, like huge lots. Forget how many 100,000 that can't get flood insurance, full stop. It's not just due to climate change. Second point is that Australia's got about 900,000 kilometres of roads, and the repairs to those roads, as far as I know, are not included in that insurance total. And as we all know, the floods are ruining regional roads, particularly in places like Queensland and outback New South Wales. So we're going to have a heck of a lot of road repair costs that regional people should be aware of. And the third point, and I think I may have mentioned this in a podcast a couple of weeks ago, is the people at Bloomberg run a repair and remodel index in the stock exchange, and that's vastly outperformed the stock exchange in the S&P index in the USA over the past few years. Vastly outperformed it. And secondly, if you do the analysis on all the money that's been spent, you can make it add up to something like 30% of GDP growth in the United States is due to the work done to recover from disasters already, and that's expected to grow. So The point is, we don't hear a lot about all these costs when we talk about the costs of net zero, any more than we hear about all the money that super funds aren't actually investing in the sector when they could be. But these costs are very real. They are going to grow. They're part of those everyday problems that climate change causes.
Absolutely. And we'll be hopefully addressing some of those issues about super funds and why they're not investing and how we might encourage them to invest in the energy transition sometime soon. So, David, thank you very much for that. Thanks also to Jan Daniel Kaemmer from Vestas for a fascinating insight into the state of the wind industry at the moment. Thanks, of course, to our sponsors, Evergen and Pylon. And we'll be back with another episode of Energy Insiders next week. And bye for now.